Hello ladies and gents, and welcome to the AJ Roberts Show. Bit different today. I'm not actually doing it via Zoom or via Facebook or StreamYard or anything else like that. We're actually doing it for the first time live in the HQ in AJ Roberts Show studio. Pretty cool. And today we're joined by none other than Joe Elwell. I met Joe a few weeks back at a stand in the park where people get together from all around the country and basically engage in conversation and dialogue, reference what's going on at the moment, and obviously their discourse towards it all, the way people are being treated, the way freedoms are being taken away. Everybody that goes to the stand in the parks is very much awake to what's going on and have been for some time. And that's where I met Joe. Just turns out that Joe is a molecular biologist with a PhD and has worked for Astrazeneca, Pfizer, and here in the UK at Porton Down. So I wanted to invite Joe onto the show today so we can have a good chat about her past, obviously the setup of where she worked, and obviously a lot to do with the things that are going on at the minute, not just because of the push from these companies, but also some of the scientific stuff that a lot of people don't really understand, or maybe the jargon may have been a bit sort of over their heads, and clearly you don't hear about it in the mainstream media. But before we start, I wanted to give my good friend, who is also a veteran, a shout out with this fantastic company that he's got. So it's a drinks company called Doodles, and the concept is obviously geared towards younger children. So you can actually use felt tips, crayons and colouring pencils to actually draw on the can. But it's in essence sparkling water with pure fruit juices, so there's no added sugar. So very, very good concept, very good for our children. So I wanted to give him a shout out because he's been a big supporter of the show, and he's got a fantastic product. So awesome little plug there for Lee, Doodles Drinks. And it's on Facebook and Instagram as Doodles Products if you guys are interested. He's always trying to align with clubs and schools and establishments that promote good, healthy living and education for our younger generation. And it's even good for adults to drink as well. So there you go. But Joe, thank you for joining us today here at AJ Roberts HQ.
You're welcome. Yeah, I'm excited to be here, to be the first person to be in your studio. It's great.
Yeah, I love it. It's a work in progress, like most podcasts. Joe Rogan will tell you the same. So, Joe, just if you wouldn't mind, for the benefit of the viewers and the listeners, just share a bit about your background and how you got to where you are today, because obviously you left school, obviously a budding scientist.
Yeah, so I was lucky in that as a child I knew that I always wanted to do science, and I knew that I wanted to eventually move into the pharmaceutical industry to help, develop drugs to treat disease, to help people with serious diseases get better. Mm-hmm. And it was quite a journey. Started off at Manchester Metropolitan University, where I did an applied biology degree, Bachelor of Science, and then went on to do a PhD at Bristol University and in molecular biology. So I got the hands-on experience doing all the molecular biology techniques, and then from there I got my first proper job in the scientific community, working at Porton Down. Mm-hmm. And there I was funded for 2 years to try and develop a mimic of the binding domain of tetanus neurotoxin. And it was, once again, for me as a scientist, it was more about getting hands-on experience in the lab and working with other scientists and just developing those, practical skills and the thought processes behind troubleshooting experiments and things like that. I wasn't really focusing too much on why am I developing a mimic of the binding domain of tetanus toxin, which now as an adult I asked myself, but when I was 20-something years old it didn't really bother me too much. But from then I had the urge for some reason to go and work in America or just go work in another country, and I was lucky enough to, well, maybe it wasn't luck, maybe it was fate, because I believe in fate, to go work at Los Alamos National Laboratory in the US, and that's where they developed the atom bomb. It's quite a high-profile government-funded agency. And I basically moved into more from molecular biology, but using those techniques into more of the using antibodies as tools for different things. So my role at Los Alamos National Lab was to develop a detection antibody for the bacteria that causes the plague. So if the plague bacteria was ever released on a large scale, industrial scale, like a large scale event, we would have an antibody that would specifically detect the bacteria. And that bacteria has a protein that only exists in that bacteria. It's called F1. Mm-hmm. So we developed antibodies to F1. And we published the work and still waiting for the biothreat attack with, the plague, but it hasn't happened yet. But anyway, once again, I got, working with high profile scientists, and during that time I was working on a visa, and you could only stay there as a postdoc for 3 years maximum, and then you either had to get a permanent job or leave. And I felt like my time was done there and didn't want to come back to England yet, so I managed to get another postdoc position working at Duke University in North Carolina, where I worked in the brain tumour research unit with Dr. Darrell Bigner. And we were developing antibodies for treatment of brain tumours. So when you've got a brain tumour, once again, it expresses a protein that isn't usually expressed on normal brain tissue. So you can develop antibodies to these abnormal proteins. And then what they were doing is quite cool, is they were arming them with radioactivity. So you'd get your antibody, arm it with radioactivity, and then deliver it and kill the brain tumour that way.
Wow.
So that was where I first got into more working with, animal models, becoming more kind of human biology-based antibody research. And while I was at Duke University, I managed to get my green card, and that just opened up so many doors for me as a scientist. So from there, I worked for a local company in North Carolina, which wasn't really related to antibody. It was a molecular biology company, but not antibody related. And then from there, after I'd been there a couple of years, I needed to be challenged more. I needed more. So I started applying for jobs and managed to find a position working in Gaithersburg, Maryland, for MedImmune. Now, MedImmune are basically AstraZeneca. They're a huge company. It's the arm of the company that's called biologics. Mm-hmm. So you've got your small molecule drugs that, historically, when you're ill, you're giving a small molecule drug which will treat a disease. But biologics are more antibody-based. Mm-hmm. So you can develop antibodies to basically anything, because antibodies are very cool in that you can engineer them to bind to different proteins, lots of different proteins. So while I was working there, I was involved in a lot of cancer programs, which were important to me, and really felt like I was making a difference and making a valued contribution to what was going on. And what my role at the company was to look at things differently. I've always been a person to bring change. I've never been afraid of change. And it was basically the way that we were screening the antibody libraries. There was a very routine way that has always been used throughout every pharma company. Mm-hmm. It's a technique called ELISA, where you use recombinant antigen. It's just a purified protein, basically. But what my role was to bring more cell-based assays into the screening pipeline, so you're actually screening for cellular function, right? So that you're getting more of a direct biological readout from the experiments that you're doing. Mm-hmm. People there didn't want to embrace the change, so I felt that my time was wasted there. My boss hired me and to make this change, but then when it came down to it, none of my colleagues wanted to do things differently. So I thought, well, what's the point of me being here then? So started looking on the old Indeed.com for more jobs, and there is the job at Pfizer, basically exactly the same job description, because this is a novel thing. To screen for function is a very novel thing to do. Exactly the same basically job description that I was doing. But Pfizer gave me the opportunity to not only make these changes, but we had a dedicated team, and we were given, all the technological tools that we needed to do that. So Pfizer really invested in, the new way of screening. And while I was there, I had a few oncology programs, but it was more psoriasis, like skin rashes, dermatitis kind of programs, and programs related to diabetes. So when you have diabetes and you're obese, you get what's called a fatty liver. And every program that I seemed to be involved on was to do with diabetes. And I just thought to myself, hang on a minute, like diabetes can be cured. Type 2 diabetes can be cured if you make a big effort to change your diet and exercise. You don't need a pill to treat these conditions.
And obviously diabetes in places like the United States rife, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think there's two extremes. There's like the really obese or like the really super healthy. It's like there's nothing to be anybody in the middle there. But I was working, and because we were bringing this new this new team to the department, I was working, my choice, I was working 80 hours a week. I was dedicating my life to setting up this new group in the department, and my boss was great. He supported me in every way that I could. But I wasn't eating properly. I was skipping lunch. I was living on coffee. I was going home and drinking like a pack of beer just to cope. And I'd be up till midnight on my computer replying to emails. And it just, for 2 years, I was just solid work. And okay, I was getting a 6-figure salary and I was getting great bonuses. But what is the point of all this money if you don't actually have a life and your health is actually at detriment? And,
100%.
And during the time that I worked, like I was in North Carolina, I'd started to listen to Alex Jones on Infowars.com, and it was the Sandy Hook shooting actually that kind of made me think about and question like life, and the news and the media, and I just started to kind of like question things, not only in my work but in outside life. And so when
nothing's always as it seems type of thing.
No, it's not. Yeah. It's not. And
so every time you see something, it's not always like what the media portrays. Right. It's not always verbatim.
No, exactly. And as a result of that, now I don't believe anything unless I see it with my own eyes, and I don't believe the result of anything scientific unless I do the experiment myself. Because one thing that became apparent when I was working for the pharmaceutical industries is that we'd have a biology team that would, look through all the disease indications and all the different biological processes that were involved in a certain disease. And there's usually academic labs that do like the groundwork, testing all these different pathways and things. And quite often, every time we tried to reproduce somebody else's work that was published in a scientific journal, we could hardly ever repeat it. So now scientific publications don't actually mean anything to me, because just because it's published in a scientific journal doesn't mean that the science is right.
Yeah, we know that for fact anyway, because Dr. Peter McCulloch's actually talked about this a few times, where early stages when there was clearly alternative treatments to what is being pushed on society, there were fraudulent publications being written about like HCQ, for example, and saying it was actually like quite detrimental to the heart and stuff like that, when he's one of the leading cardiologists in the world, was said, we've held more hands here in this clinic, more heart, than most places. We know what is good and what is bad, for the heart. And HCQ is definitely not one of them. But you had qualified doctors and physicians, writing these publications with a clear motive and very much part of the narrative. To I guess disrupt. This and do exactly that. And we're seeing it all over the place. And over the last, I guess, 6 months, I've seen so many articles in that which have been written on purpose for that reason to shut things down. Like the Cambridge testing on Iver, use the full term, but they were ramping up all the doses and everything. So it was almost overdosing the tests. So it made it look bad on purpose.
Yeah. Oh. With any scientific data that you produce, you can you can generate and manipulate data however you want it for whatever outcome you want.
So in theory, you could create a model,
yeah,
however you wanted,
yeah,
put it onto a nice graph,
yeah,
with some TV cameras on it, and
yeah,
stand next to it and go, well, we're going to see this, and this.
Yeah.
So as long as the narrative that you choose at the start,
right,
before you make the model, you then base the model on that narrative,
right,
whether it's true or not.
Right. Yeah. And also a lot of scientific publications too, a lot of the work is funded by certain organisations that are driving some aspect of,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
whether a drug's good or bad.
So when you started thinking like that and you started asking a lot more questions, and like key characteristics, I guess, of being a good scientist is to constantly ask questions, constantly debate, constantly test theories, you know, all this kind of really good stuff, not just like fixed one way, this is how it is.
Right.
Just like all good entrepreneurs do, you know, you're constantly asking questions, you're constantly looking at data, you're constantly
thinking of better ways to do things.
Better ways to do it, disrupting as well.
Yeah, bringing change. Right?
Yes, yeah, exactly, yeah. So when you started doing more of that, did you then start picking up on things like within Pfizer, for example, of like certain like pharmaceutical directions that were going in different areas? Or you started hearing more conversations and?
Not necessarily, but not necessarily to that regard. I mean, I don't think they ever really. The organisations that I work with every single program that I worked on, if something wasn't adding up, I was speaking out and calling it out. Do you know what I mean? And we always had teams, biological teams that had representatives from every part of. So you've got a pipeline, right? A drug development pipeline. You have people from all parts of that pipeline, from early drug discovery, which is the point where I was working, to the end point. You had representatives from all aspects of the pipeline sitting on that group. So you know, the statisticians and everything, and for the most part, people I work with were genuine. But what I'm saying is that other work from academic institutions and other publications, I just don't trust it. You know. So and that. But one thing that did kind of made me sad was when I was working for Pfizer. They had a really great neuroscience department. There was like 300 scientists who had so much expertise and knowledge, and Pfizer just decided that it wasn't, I don't know, maybe making them enough money, that their pipeline wasn't strong enough in that area, so they basically cut the whole neuroscience department. And if you think about the neurological diseases that affect our society, like you know, schizophrenia or I'm trying to think of multiple sclerosis. My auntie had multiple sclerosis. You know, these debilitating neurological diseases that people, you know, can be really severely have their lives affected by. Like, you're just not going to treat those. You're not going to go, you know, treat those try and find cures for those diseases anymore, because maybe you're not making enough money to make it worthwhile.
Possibly, but on the flip side as well, for a person who has you know, such diseases, it's the logistics and everyday struggle that goes with it. Right. So it's like the constant care, it's the constant you know, so what it actually costs the state more money,
right,
for a person being in or having such conditions. My
auntie had a permanent morphine patch, a morphine tank inside of her that she used to have to go and get filled up and things. It's just crazy. But yeah, so after working in the industry and kind of being awake to that the world isn't necessarily as I thought it was, I started to think, do I really want to be part of this anymore? And plus I just got to the point, I reached 40 and kind of had a midlife crisis early, I suppose you'd call it, and I just decided that I wanted to come back to England and basically just quit my job and move back. And
so it takes a lot of courage to do something like that.
Yeah.
Especially when, you know, your PhD is in you know, such thing, and you spent all that time at university, and then all the different companies, different environments, colleagues.
Yeah, it's what I always ever wanted to do. It's like, you know, when you say, you know, when you're at school, they say, what would you like to do for your career? Like, have a 10-year career plan. Like, I was living my 10-year career plan. I'd jumped through all the hoops and gone through so much to get the experience that I needed to work in the pharmaceutical industry. And then when I was working in it, I realised that I didn't actually. I think it's changed over the past 20 years. It's not.
It's like a lot of things, a lot of industries though. So, if like my best times in the military, for example, were being in places like Afghanistan or based in Germany and stuff like that. Obviously, those two things don't really exist anymore.
Right.
So if I went back into the military now, I probably would like it.
Right.
What seemed to be a totally different thing, and
right.
I'd be like, everything's.
What's the point of this?
Everything's so much more PC now.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It wouldn't suit me anyway.
Yeah.
So it's the same in most industries, and so obviously when you come back and leading up to the situation we find ourselves in now, like at what point did you, or if there's something you can actually recollect, is there a certain point that you were like, hang on a minute, this ain't right, but there is for most people. So for me, I always refer back to people body popping on the floor in China, and I was just like, it just looks so fake, and I said something bad's going to happen around the world. They're really using this as propaganda.
Yeah, well, it was so. I come home and managed to connect with some old school friends actually, and one of my old school friends is now a pharmacist, and we'd all gone out for lunch, and there was these mentions of coronavirus, and mentions of it, and we were discussing it, and we were like, yeah, but the coronavirus is just generally caused the common cold or flu. It's not like
probably about 0.001% of the world actually knew that prior to this, didn't they?
Right.
I didn't know common colds are coronaviruses.
Right,
and there's I think is there 6 different types or something like that, isn't there?
Something like that. Yeah. So I immediately was like, this doesn't add up. And then I started looking at, as time went on, I started looking at the demographics of the data that was being reported, and it was basically in alignment with the flu. So the people that were at risk were, your more elderly population, and that was it. Nobody, you get COVID-19, you generally get a cold, and then you get over it.
Yeah.
And
the antibodies. Obviously.
Yeah, your immune system kicks in. That's what happens. So I believe in my immune system. I believe that if you eat healthy and exercise and take best care of yourself and your immune system. That's what humans have evolved over how many millennia to have an immune system that works. You know, and
it's like it's almost been forgotten about, isn't it? And like touch wood, I'm never ill, and I think it's because of how I've kind of nourished myself, but the particular vitamins and minerals that I've put in my body over a long period of time has really helped build quite a robust immune system. Even cold symptoms I very rarely even get any at all.
Me neither.
My dear Nan, bless her, she always used to say to me, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. And I religiously eat an apple every day because my Nan was always right. And clearly she said something right. Yeah. I'm not saying that everyone should go and do that, but it's an apple.
Yeah, exactly.
Like what harm can it do?
Exactly.
But it's just remarkable how people how much they've bought into the constant programming and the messaging from media, whether that be like the BBC News, massive on it, Sky News.
The radio as well.
The radio now, the radio is terrible, and obviously you got then obviously the virtue signalling through masks, signs on all the doors, windows. You can't even drive them down the motorway now with the big flashing signs and stuff like that. It's just constant messaging.
Yeah,
it just gets people, and we're seeing it now. I'm seeing it. I'm within my own circles. People, have got runny noses, going, "Oh my God, I got COVID. What am I going to do?" I'm like, "You've had a runny nose pretty much every year of your life at some point,
right?"
And it's quite disappointing that people have mindsets have gone that way.
Yeah, and also another thing that I think is important is with this whole scamdemic, as I call it, they've locked us down. They've changed our behaviours as humans. So usually we would be going out, interacting with other people, going to different places, being exposed to lots of different flora and fauna in our environment. that helps build our immune system. But when you lock people down and restrict their interaction with other people in their environment, then your immune system is basically, you're immunocompromised.
Yeah.
So it wasn't any surprise to me that as soon as you start letting people have their freedoms back and going out and about, that people are going to start to get sick, because those normal viruses and bacteria that are in the environment, your immune system's waned, you don't have any. And
likewise, if you wear a mask all the time, isn't it? It creates a petri dish for infection.
Yeah, and they don't work. I've never worn a mask; they don't work. It's just frightening to me how many people are still. I've been speaking out since day one. Basically, since day one, I've spoke to all my friends and family, and I said, look, I'm not seeing people dropping dead in the street. Yes. As with any disease, you're always going to have an at-risk group, but let's protect the at-risk group, okay? Like we did before with flu, right? If you've got flu, you don't go visit granny. You don't go visit your friends and pass on, whatever illness you've got. But all these ridiculous social distancing, lockdowns, mask wearing, and then the tests aren't, in my opinion, aren't picking up. They're not specific for what they're saying they're specific for. And what happened when I came back to England and this coronavirus agenda started, I was approached by an ex-colleague who I used to work with at Porton Down, and he asked me if I wanted to go work in a lab doing the PCR tests for patient samples for COVID. And at the time I was on maternity leave, and I used to just go on the weekends and work. And then my husband got furloughed, right? So he was at home, he could look after our baby, and I could go to work every day. And at the time I was like, do I want to, get involved in this? And then I thought, you know what, I'm going to go and see for myself exactly what is going on, because like I say, I only trust things when I see it with my own eyes. And right in the early days, the March, April of 2020, we were testing patients basically coming into a hospital, and all the people that were testing positive were your Arthurs, your Dorises, your Irises, your Ivies, your older generation.
All my ex-girlfriends. Huh?
Yeah. Why do you always go for older women?
No.
Anyway, and I said to the manager of this medical microbiology unit, I'm looking at the data and the numbers of all the people testing positive, and it just seems to be in line with flu. And this manager replied to me, yes, I agree, but I'm not allowed to talk about it. I was like, oh, really? Okay. So that just confirmed to me that there was something sinister coming. And because I've kind of been awake for about 10 years, I thought, oh, okay, this is the start of it. I was expecting this to happen much later in my lifetime, but apparently they've started it now.
2030.
Yeah. But if you think about it, from a conspiracy theorist point of view, it happened in the year 2020. And what is 2020? It's perfect vision, right?
Yeah.
The all-seeing eye. And I was like, damn, I could have predicted this. Like, why did I not think like that? Anyway, that's another avenue of discussion. But basically, I went to work in this lab, didn't have to wear safety glasses, just scrubs. Did PCR, ran the 45 cycles.
Which is obviously, for anybody watching who isn't accustomed to, obviously, would have heard what the PCR test is, but isn't accustomed to the cycle threshold. So, Kerry Mullis, the person who invented the PCR test, stated, and it's on video, it's on YouTube and BitTube and all the rest of it, said it is not a diagnostic tool and it should never be used as such. And anything that's any test that's tested above, I think it's 24, 25 cycles, isn't it? You're looking at a 97% false positive rate. Hospitals and test centres are testing them at 45 cycles. So am I right in saying...
And even the WHO admitted it was...
The World Health Organisation,
they admitted that 45 cycles was too much and they were getting false positives from it.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that I've been kind of harping on about a bit more recently, because the CDC in the United States have turned around and said that as of 31st of December, they're going to do a class 1 recall of all PCR tests. Whether or not they replace it with something else is by the by, because their exact words were, it does not differentiate between coronavirus, common colds, flu, and obviously COVID-19, and never has been able to. So my question straight away was like, how the hell are people not screaming and shouting from the rooftops about this when those lockdowns, especially you think lockdown 2 and 3,
were driven purely by PCR positive test case numbers,
which then has actually shut for good. I think something around 300,000 businesses and families' livelihoods because of these PCR tests.
Yeah.
Now, we also know that there was millions and millions and millions of these PCR tests bought and shipped in 2018 for one purpose. So, this is how...
And it has to be a specific test. You need to know what that test is being used
100%.
for. So that means that in 2018, they knew about COVID.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they did. They've known about it for a long, long time. Again, but this is just reaffirming, ladies and gents, that this isn't something that just popped up, and the governments have tried best they can to deal with this situation. There's people still saying, "Oh, poor Boris, I would like to be in his shoes."
Oh, I know.
Like it's
he's done such a great job in protecting us and keeping us safe. That's what I hear from my neighbours.
Yeah,
and my brain.
This has been planned for so long. I shared something the other day from the actual Canadian government website, where you type in a particular word and actual contract tenders were put out in 2016 asking for ammunitions companies to supply loads of tear gas and pyrotechnics to be used for the COVID-19 pandemic. This is in 2016.
Oh.
And it's on the Canadian website, Canadian government website.
So I need to get a gas mask then, is what you're saying.
Don't go to Canada. Regarding the test, the lateral flow tests, obviously it's all we're hearing about at the minute. My kids are just so fed up with it because their parents are like, you need to do a lateral flow test. You need to do it's like it's the only way to, when in history, and Dr. Sam White said this really well, when in history, have you ever shoved something up your nose to diagnose you for something that isn't by a physician? When have you been diagnosed for a cold or a virus or a condition that hasn't been diagnosed by an actual physician?
Right.
When in history has that ever happened?
Right.
And why can't you do a spit test rather than shove something straight up your nose?
Yeah. Well, we were actually trying to develop spit tests at the hospital that I worked for when we were doing the PCR tests. Mm-hmm. But once again, it's all about using the primer sequences that are specific for coronavirus. Like your test is only as good as the tools that you have to develop it. But yeah, you're right. And I now work for a high street shop and earning £10 an hour when I used to earn 5 times, 6 times that an hour. And the company provided lateral flow tests. And I thought, I'm going to take some of these home and look at the instructions, look how the test is supposed to be done. So if you look at the test, it says, blow your nose and get rid of all the mucus out of your nose, right, before you do the test. That doesn't make any sense to me, because as a scientist, you want to be swabbing the fluids that contain the virus, right? If you're testing for a virus, then why would you blow your nose and get rid of all that? Yeah. And then you have to swab right up into your nose and scrape against your skin, right? Doesn't make, like you say, just why can you just not wipe the snot and on the swab and test that? Because surely if the virus is present, you're going to be detecting it. So I was reading it. I was reading the instructions, and nowhere did it say how the test worked. And I was like, how does this test work? It just tells you how to do it, but it didn't actually tell you how it works. So I thought, right, I'm going to do some Googling. So I got on PubMed, which is this scientific basically Google for scientists, and I Googled the publication where the lateral flow test had been validated in the UK for asymptomatic testing of people for COVID, and read the publication and saw that there was a corresponding author called Tim Pito. So I was like, I'm going to email Tim. So I send off this email to Tim saying, hi Tim, I'm Jo, I've got a PhD in molecular biology, I've worked in antibody engineering, I understand how lateral flow tests work. They use antibodies, and antibodies recognise proteins. So, obviously, the lateral flow test is like the PCR test, because the PCR is looking for DNA or RNA. It's looking for a protein. So, please can you tell me what protein is the test detecting? And he came back with, excellent question. We don't know. We're trying to reverse engineer it to figure it out. And my brain just wanted to explode, because I was like, here is a guy who's published an article validating the lateral flow test for the detection of COVID-19, but doesn't actually know how the test works. And I replied back and said, well, let me give you some insight. I suspect it's spike protein.
Yeah.
And if it is spike protein that the test is detecting, then it's no wonder that vaccinated people are testing positive for COVID, because when you are vaccinated, you are given genetic instructions and your body makes spike protein. So people who are vaccinated are making spike protein, and the lateral flow tests are detecting spike protein. So it's a self-perpetuating scamdemic, and that is basically what I replied back to him, and I haven't heard back from him since. So that's just my opinion as a scientist. I have no proof, because like I said, I haven't even,
Well, maybe he saw your email and quit.
No, I don't know. I should email him asking if he's all right. Sorry, mate, I didn't mean to upset you. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on.
I mean, didn't mean to blow your mind, although you should really know this.
Yeah,
but
as a
if you're gonna,
scientist, wouldn't you question it? Yeah.
Yeah, but also writing a publication and then
admitting you don't know how it works.
Yeah.
How can you validate a test when you don't actually know how it works?
But we've seen this the whole time, hence why the PCR test is not validated to do what it does, because it doesn't detect the very thing that they're saying they're supposed to be looking for.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take somebody like myself who's got a podcast and other people like such. You don't need to be a scientist or a doctor to understand that.
No.
That this is just one massive, like you're saying, self-perpetuated cycle of scam.
Yeah.
And this is exactly why so many people I know who have been vaccinated have been tested positive for COVID. And then said, I've got COVID again. But the first thing they say is, well, it's a good job I got vaccinated, otherwise I would end up in hospital. And it's just like, oh my God. I'm angry at the system, not them.
Right.
And I say this all the time, every single person makes a choice. You've got a choice to do everything, right?
Right.
For now.
It's called, it's called freedom, right?
Yeah. And, everyone at some point over the last year has made a choice what they think is the best thing for them and their family or themselves or their career, or in some cases, because you like working in an industry where you feel like, I need to protect others, because that has been the very, very strong subliminal messaging has been, it's all about protect others, wear your mask, protect others, get
jabs. You're not vaccinated, then you're selfish.
Yeah, protect others, protect others, protect others. And so people have done what they've done, their choice for whatever reason. And I think, and even now, where so many of my friends, so many people in my wider circle who've been vaccinated are like, oh my God, I feel like absolute death. Tested positive, but I'm so glad that I had it, because I was going to hospital. It would have been
worse. But how do you know you would have been worse? That's the point. It's like it's all just hearsay.
Yeah. But we know the scientific evidence is there, and just like you said, that they are producing the spike protein within themselves,
right.
The variants within themselves,
right.
Which is what's making them ill. And obviously, the more spike protein, the lower their immune system is, isn't it? Because it attacks the immune system.
And do you know what's quite interesting? So I've been working with another group of people to basically allow us to inform people exactly how the vaccines work. So I've been doing a lot of reading around the different government information out there. So basically, if you watch any of the NHS videos about the vaccine or look on the website, they do not explain in clear terms that it is genetic code that people are being injected with, and that their own cells are making a spike protein that is foreign to their body, right? Then, in my opinion, it's genetic engineering, right? That's my opinion. But if you go to the CDC website in America, they've actually got a pretty good write-up, and they give a pretty clear explanation as to how the vaccines work. So it's interesting to see the difference in the way the governments are providing the information, because on the NHS they just don't even mention. They just say it's just like a normal vaccine, and I'm like, it is not like a normal vaccine. When we used to try and generate antibodies in the pharma industry, we would routinely, for the most part, say if you've got a certain protein, like this can, that is representative of a protein on a brain tumour, we could make that protein, just that one protein, in a cell, purify it, and then inject it into mice or rats for them to produce antibodies to it. That's one way of generating antibodies that we can use for therapeutic use. But sometimes proteins are very complex. They're glycosylated. They have all these once the protein's been made, enzymes come back and modify it and put sugars on it. And that's very difficult to do in the lab. So if you've got a protein target that's highly glycosylated and highly chemically modified, you really need to, you can't make it in the lab. So what we used to do, the strategy, was to take the genetic sequence of that protein and immunise rats or mice with the genetic sequence, just like what we're doing now with humans. We're immunising them with genetic code. And quite often, the rats and the mice would die for no reason.
I've seen these in a lot of the trial reports and stuff like that, especially with these, because and they found, like, when they did the autopsies on the animals, like, their organs were all completely, like, smashed from spike protein, wasn't it? The SP2 spike protein.
Yeah, the spike protein, I just don't think it's. I think it's been engineered to cause damage.
Yeah, but I mean, the fact that the spike protein in these jabs have patents on them.
Yeah.
And Dr. Richard Fleming shared this. The patents are owned by the Rothschilds and were patented in 2015. So for anybody watching who doesn't know who the Rothschilds are, they're a very large family. Multi-trillionaires own all the, with them and the Rockefellers and the BlackRock and Vanguard groups. They own the world banks, like all of them. So when everyone's going, oh yeah, Jeff Bezos, he's the richest in the world. They're not. These people are like multi-trillionaires who are calling all the shots right now, because you got them, the Vanguard group. They basically control the Bill and Melinda Gates foundations, the Clintons. They then control, obviously, large portions of the pharmaceutical companies.
Yep.
The pharmaceutical companies have obviously shares.
Yep.
A lot of these shares are owned by people in governments. I mean, you only have to look at old Gladys from Australia, New South Wales Premier. She was offered $68 million by AstraZeneca to completely crash the economy in New South Wales and carry out and push all the policies and the lockdowns that we're seeing. So,
money talks.
Please tell me again how the governments are just trying to do the very best by their people in these countries. I think what we're seeing as well in Canada and Australia now, and I continue to please encourage people in the UK to actually look away from BBC, Sky News, stuff like that, and mainstream media, because they are absolutely compressing everything. And look at what's happening in Australia. So in Victoria alone, like, as of now, I think it is, like, you can't even go to work and get a job unless you're vaccinated. And even their level of exemptions are, like, so small. Like, it's almost like they won't accept you to be exempt. You have to have this pass. Italy have completely brought in a COVID pass to even go to the supermarket. Places like Cyprus, you need to be vaccinated to get fuel for your car. There's countries that have brought all of this in. And although things might seem quite relaxed and open here in the UK,
it's going to change.
If you've actually been paying attention to what's going on, things are going to change very quickly in a bad way. So the Coronavirus Act was extended without voting it in for another 6 months, meaning that the government has jurisdiction.
So the way I understand it is because we are in a pandemic and we have, this pandemic status, the vaccines have been approved for emergency use
only,
because we're in pandemic status.
Absolutely.
As soon as that pandemic status ends, the vaccines can no longer be administered under the emergency authorization. So they need the pandemic status to continue to administer the vaccines because they're still under clinical trial.
And they have to acknowledge all other alternative treatments as well. So your HCQs, your IVAs, your Joe Rogan horse dewormers, you know, all those kind of types. Like they have to be acknowledged, don't they, and available.
Yeah.
If you're not in emergency use, which is what we find ourselves in. But you know, we've been fully open since July doing stuff like please tell me where the emergency need is and where the pandemic is.
Right.
Like I don't see. Well, I haven't seen it anyway.
Well, now we're getting higher cases in children, so you know what that's all about, right? We need to vaccinate the children. That's what the push is now, right?
It's shocking, and I'm glad that a lot of good work from a lot of good people has prevented them being rolled out in down south, places like Dorset and stuff like that, and it's continuing to do so around the country because the schools are, rightly so, not wanting the liability because children have died. There is, and as I mentioned on the Stu Peters show, for those of you who've seen it, there's a police crime number has been issued for people who are pressing charges for murder, for the murder of a young 17-year-old lad in the West Midlands in England, and not only that, there's another 2 schools that they've now just got crime numbers for them, you know, committing crimes against humanity, and that's basically what we're facing. People just need to understand, you know, if it wasn't that serious, why are these charges being brought in? You know, they're the questions that you should be asking yourself. Right. You know, if you don't really understand what's going on.
Right. It's a safe vaccine. Yeah.
But my question is at the minute, because obviously they've got this real big push for the whole booster thing, and the propaganda's already starting, right? They're already saying, to save Christmas, you need your booster. To go on holiday next year, you need your booster. Well, think about what we've just been through, ladies and gents. Like, you had to be vaccinated to go on holiday without restrictions just for this year. Now they're saying you need your booster for next year. Israel are already starting to market the 4th jab, because the 3rd jab, if you haven't got your 3rd jab now in Israel, you're no longer vaccinated. So you're just going to have to keep queuing up and queuing up and queuing up. And I guess restrictions and luxuries and all this kind of stuff, they're still no really better off than somebody
who isn't vaccinated.
Exactly.
And the point is, as a scientist, the way a vaccine works, in my opinion, is that it prevents disease, right? You know, if you've had the tetanus vaccine and you go out into the garden and you cut yourself on a rusty nail and the tetanus bacteria goes into your body, because your body's already been primed, your immune system's already been primed, it can attack that bacteria and you know, it can prevent disease. It can prevent the tetanus bacteria from reproducing. But they admit all the time that, you know, once you've had the COVID vaccine, you can still get it and you can still pass it on. So that isn't a vaccine.
Which does not sell the use for COVID vaccine passports at all. So they're saying, obviously, they brought it in Scotland and Wales, and they're saying, like, if you can go to nightclubs or big venues where there's 500 or more people, I think it was, or something like that. So if you do so, you need to have a COVID passport. But, like, so everyone in there would be vaccinated. And what we've seen in many places around the world is where it's been a vaccinated-only event or stuff like that, there's been breakouts every single time. So the naval ship, which was full of vaccinated sailors and, you know, well, everyone aboard was. You got that plane. There was the medical place in either Indonesia or Thailand or something like that. It was, it might have been Singapore. There was basically these places like Carnival cruise ship, just all the staff, every passenger, massive breakouts, and it's because we know that they're producing the Delta variant. It's
putting selective pressure on the virus to mutate.
Yeah. And just like Dr. Peter McCulloch said on the podcast, and many others have done already, and that's all that's going to happen. So, you know, if people stand there and comply and allow these passports to come in, and I think that's very much why we're seeing it's called the calm before the storm, so to speak, is because it's
very unsettling to me.
Yeah, it's all becoming a bit of like social acceptance of what's going on. The British government are very sly at doing it compared to your Canadas and Australias, France and Italy's and stuff like that, because it becomes more of a like social accepted norm.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll say what? It's just an app.
Right, just an app. Yeah.
But then what turns from an app is massively turns into digital passports, digital ID. which we know in China has been around for over 4 years now. So in Shenzhen, if you and this has been in since 2017, if you jaywalk, facial recognition cameras pick up your face and then see what you've committed a crime and instantly take the money out of your bank, like that. And this is what we're already starting to see in the UK now. They're already starting to see about kids being able to pay for things in school using facial recognition.
Yeah, or eye scans.
Yeah.
Scan your retina as well.
Yeah, and the fact that most people spend their time on phones, especially children and teenagers, it's all the social acceptance, and you get that dopamine hit from going like, oh, like a comment and positive, being rewarded, right? And then this is where the problem's going to be, because if they start saying, well, actually, you need to have this app and you get rewarded and being able to do all these luxuries by doing X, Y, and Z, people are used to that anyway, and they like that.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, like you say, it's just another thing, just another app to have, right?
Yeah.
I hate apps.
it's just 3 weeks to flatten the curve, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just a mask.
It's the longest 3 weeks in history.
It's just a mask. It's just social distancing.
Don't have Christmas with your family. It's just one Christmas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people are very quick to forget that, like, if you actually add up all the things that they've put in place, it's quite alarming that the sheer amount of people have conformed to it.
Yeah, and still conform to it.
And I've been saying this for a few weeks, ladies and gents. This isn't although it feels like it sometimes, this isn't a big game of I told you so.
No, I want to be wrong. I want to be wrong.
100%. Like,
I so want to be wrong.
I know. But we're at a point now where it doesn't matter what your what your vaccination status is. Everyone needs to come together as soon as possible, like way before winter kicks in properly, and they start trying to ramp up the fear and the propaganda to say that you can't go out unless you've had your booster, you can't do this unless you've had a booster, and then it will be you can't go out unless you've got your vaccine passport.
Right.
We're going to have to bring vaccine passports in, and that's what they'll do. They'll start bringing all this stuff on.
And maybe even, you can't have Christmas because of the unvaccinated people. They're the reason for this. Trying to cause divide.
Yeah.
I'm predicting that.
Yeah, we're seeing it already, and it doesn't help when you've got former prime ministers, Tony Blair, going onto the TV and saying that he thinks unvaccinated people are going to kill the vaccinated, and that the vaccinated should stop talking to the unvaccinated and stuff like that. How these people get airtime.
Divide and conquer.
Yeah,
divide and conquer.
Yeah. But that's the thing, as a nation, as human beings, as British people, we've got to come together and stand up against this, because especially if you've got kids, and even if you haven't got kids, like your chances are you've got a nephew, a niece, stuff like that. It's their future is going to be the one that's completely crushed by this. They're already trying to put the propaganda in about lockdowns and then working from home again. My son plus all his friends, my niece, they're doing their GCSEs this year. It's supposed to be, and I'm already worried for what it's going to look like because of what they're trying to do. Yeah. Based on based on no science. This isn't based on science. This is not based on health, is it?
No, it's not about a virus. It's not about a deadly virus. It's not.
So, what's your thoughts? Where does your vision sit for the next for this winter? What do you think? What's the worst case scenario first?
Well, I'm predicting another lockdown over Christmas, and I think they are going to try and bring the vaccine passports in because the government have already kind of alluded to it with their plan B. And if we get to the point like where Italy are in, where you can't even go shopping unless you've been vaccinated, then isn't that just full-on tyranny? Yeah. Isn't that just... Are we allowed to say it like Nazi Germany? It is, and it's just mind-blowing, and I really fear... But I think everyone thinks this is going away, but I think over the next year it's actually going to ramp up even more, personally. But
best case scenario?
Is there a best case scenario? There's got to be a best case scenario that we just let
Boris goes, right, I've had enough, I'm not playing the game anymore.
I don't think I can do that.
And actually, turns everything around. And then writes a book.
Best case scenario is that they give us our freedoms and continue to vaccinate people that want to be vaccinated and vaccinate people that want to be vaccinated and leave people alone who don't want to be vaccinated. But in my opinion, they want to get that vaccine into as many people as they can. Oh, and the whole school thing too. They did it last year, right? They opened up the schools. They let everyone go back to schools after creating chaos in people's homes where people were working from homes and looking after their kids. So when they opened up the schools, all the parents were like, yay, the kids are going back to school. And then started to give them the flu jabs at school.
Mm-hmm.
And then once they got the flu jabs into all the kids, they lock them back down again.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we know that the flu jabs and the flu myths recently have been making a lot of kids ill.
Yeah, because it's usually live virus of some kind.
Yeah, so they get COVID-like symptoms.
Yeah.
Then the propaganda's like, well, this is why you need to get your COVID jabs.
Yes.
Kids.
Right.
Even though the risk, and it's been said by not just a handful of people who have been on my podcast, or my opinion, your opinion, it's been said by thousands and thousands and thousands of medical professionals, the risk of myocarditis, pericarditis, and other severe injuries from these vaccines in children far outweighs the risk of them even getting it, let alone dying from it.
Right, being seriously ill from it.
So
and at the end of the day, if you've had proper flu, proper flu, where it kicks your ass and you're in bed for 2 weeks and you can't move, you ache, you feel like you want to die, that is proper flu. Not, I've got a bit of a head cold, I've got the flu. No, proper flu will kick your ass. COVID will probably kick your ass too if your immune system's compromised, but it's not going to
Or if you have a lot of comorbidities or you're overweight,
Well, for me, when
diet.
people say, people who are obese are in the at-risk group, well, it just makes total sense, right? Because if they're obese, they are not probably eating a healthy, balanced diet. And that's what we need to allow our immune systems to function properly. And they're probably not going out and exercising. When you go out and exercise, you're getting your blood pumping, you may be going out and getting your vitamin D from the sun. There's all these other factors that contribute.
And this is where the problem where these vaccines come in, because I heard a really good analogy the other day. So like in American football, the quarterback's obviously got the ball and he's always looking for that one runner. And it's like you're saying, but there's loads of other players on the pitch, right? And there's loads of the opposite teams trying to come and smash you.
Yeah.
So thinking of like your immune system is trying to hit this one target, because that's now what your immune system's doing. Now it's been trained to do because of the RNA vaccine technology.
Yeah. It's just for the spike protein.
Exactly. So it's aiming at this one thing, but then it starts getting hit from everywhere else, and it can't defend against it.
Right.
Which is then why so many vaccinated people now are getting ill. And they're getting ill more often, and then that's basically how their immune system's getting lower and lower and lower.
Right.
It generally stops me sleeping at night knowing how many in my circle, family, this, that, and the other have been, vaccinated, and like with it getting a lot worse, the weather. We're getting new information every single week through really credible sources. You can see just the draconian measures in these different countries, and just the dystopian attitudes of these governments and how they're willingly, you go and wave Nuremberg codes in the face saying they're breaking it all over the place. They literally just take out your hand and stamp on the floor. Where are the human rights lawyers is what I want to know.
And it's funny because human rights, when Tony Blair was in office, was a huge thing, right? It was all about people's human rights. Everything, or most of his agenda was about human rights. But now, apparently, we've lost all of our human rights.
Yeah.
We don't have any.
But so in Australia, people are getting arrested for putting a post on Facebook. People are having everything taken away from them. You're fined $500 if you take your mask down to have a drink of coffee. Police are actually checking people's coffee cups to make sure there's stuff in it, that they're not just walking around with an empty coffee cup being outside. That is that bad in a country where the temperature is going up. And we're going to find ourselves slowly but surely creeping towards that unless we come together
and stop this.
And stop this.
I've always said this all ends when we say no more. And I say that to people all the time. I'm like, this is only going to end when people just stand up and go, we're not doing this anymore. Yeah. That's the only way.
Yeah, no, exactly that. And I think luckily a lot of friends and family who have been vaccinated are now like, well, what do I need to go get a booster for? Like,
if it worked the first 2 times,
why do I need a third of the same thing?
Do you get the flu vaccine 3 times a year?
Yeah, but any.
Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
Yeah, so if it was, this is another reason, just plain obvious that it's not a vaccine.
No.
It's
And another thing, as a scientist, right? So with the flu vaccine, like you just mentioned, they give people the virus, the influenza virus, but they've treated it so it can't replicate in your body.
yeah.
So you get the virus in your body and it's circulating in your blood and your immune system's recognising it and you know, it's a form of vaccination. Why aren't they doing that with the coronavirus then? Why aren't they just giving people the coronavirus that's attenuated? Why are they giving people genetic code? It doesn't make sense. As a scientist, it doesn't make sense. They're obviously using this as a huge experimental trial, because it is an experimental trial, to test out their technology.
Yeah, which obviously Robert Malone, one of the inventors of the RNA technology, explained fully on our podcast, because originally the technology was used in the military, the RNA technology.
Really?
And this is like for the programming and all this kind of stuff, and how it connects wirelessly, funnily enough, to substances.
Ooh,
yeah,
interesting.
Exactly. And then that's where they've been brought it into actually these vaccinations, this mRNA technology. Really scary stuff, like. But
and
then,
the fact that there's certain people who are invested heavily in these companies that make these technologies.
Yeah, exactly.
Like the aforementioned people that we talked about.
Exactly. And again, guys, it's if this is all kind of like mind blowing to you, I think one of the quickest and easiest things that I've done is follow the money. You know, actually look at the trends of where the money's gone for everything. So I explained earlier about the Rothschilds have the patents on the spike proteins in these RNA technology jabs, right? And they're trying to do whatever they can to get as many out around the world. Okay, so ask yourself, why is that? You know.
So when I was living in New Mexico, actually, my neighbour told me about a documentary called Thrive, and it's a 2-hour documentary that basically woke me up. It was one of the things that woke me up, and it explains what we're just talking about now. It kind of talks about aliens a little bit at the beginning, which if you're not into that, you can kind of skip through, but it gives a very good explanation of how the world works.
Okay, that's really interesting.
Yeah, Thrive it's called.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
So yeah, that's what basically that woke me up.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, you know, a lot of this is very difficult to kind of suddenly process if it's all very new to you, and I think that's what we find in a lot of people. I think the worst thing you could do is just like hammer somebody who follows narrative with just all this information, because it just overwhelms them, you know, and then they become disinterested. If you then just start hammering with all this scientific jargon, medical jargon, and people just don't understand it.
Right.
If you don't,
and they're playing on that too. They're playing on the fact that people don't understand the science.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, or people just won't follow the money, for example.
Right.
You know, that's been one of the biggest things. That everything links to each other. You know, like just look at the fact that you've got to get PCR tests to go on holiday, but you can only use
a specific
company and pay for a test, which doesn't differentiate between colds, flus, and stuff. And then even though you pay for one to come home, even though it says negative, you've still got to quarantine. And if it's a red list country, you've got to quarantine at your expense in a hotel for 10 days, which has loads of people on that working there who act like prison guards. So you literally kept a prisoner as a healthy person in your own country. One of the main contractors that works, supplies security staff for those hotels is G4S. They're renowned for being pretty useless, right? So they massively messed up with the 2012 Olympic Games, which meant that the army then had to come in and supply loads of people to do security. Majority of the people in these quarantine hotels aren't English. They're all from the dinghies. This is seriously, the people that are coming over as illegal immigrants are then working in these hotels, because if you they're all big hotels. So if you imagine you've got 50 to 100 staff needed for 24-hour periods, right? 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It's going to be very difficult to recruit 50 to 100 English people that aren't going to ask questions, aren't going to stand and go, hang on a minute, there's nothing wrong with these people.
Why is he not allowed out of his room?
Why are we keeping these people locked up? Whereas these people have no idea what's going on. They just want to get paid.
Yeah, and they just want to be away from where they're trying to escape from. So they'll do whatever means necessary.
100%, and that's exactly what's happening. And I know this because I've spoken to people who stay in hotels, and I've asked them to go and speak to a lot of these people and ask them where they're from. And every single one of them said they're coming on a boat. And that's the problems we face. It's all very financial.
It's all orchestrated.
It's all orchestrated. It's all money, power driven.
Well, it all is, even with people like, with people, I believe there's people who are working in the NHS and who are working in the pharmaceutical industries that realise this is the scam for what it is.
Yeah.
But they need their job.
Yeah.
And I was at the position where when I went to work doing the PCR testing, I turned and told the manager, I don't need this job. Because I'm awake, I've got savings. I'm minimising my expenses. I'm living a life, so I'm not completely dependent on my job.
Yeah, and the state
and the state. So, I don't. But people need to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So they're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Well, we know what's the government agendas are when it comes to priming people and priming the public. They pretty much tell you what they're going to do.
Yep.
And Sajid already said yesterday, I think it was, that he's leaning towards all the NHS staff having to be vaccinated. Well, that's just going to cause loads of whistleblowers for starters.
Yeah, hopefully.
Because without fail, every single day, either on email or Instagram or Facebook or something like that, I get a nurse or a practitioner in the NHS reach out to me every day. And the messages is very similar. Like, they can't wait to get out. There's so much sinister stuff going on. It's horrendous. It's been like it since day one. And I get every single day without fail. Yeah. I get a different nurse or physician contact me, saying that they're going to speak out. They've had enough. They're walking away.
Hopefully they'll come on your show and tell the truth.
Yeah, but I mean, some are. Over the next few weeks, because it's not just like in recent months. Obviously, you've got like the really, really bad issue with what happened in the care homes.
Yeah.
March, April, May last year. Which is a genuine thing.
Yeah.
And what the protocols we're actually seeing at the minute with the use of remdesivir and midazolam still in actual hospital settings. Honestly, like every week someone reaches out and says, "Oh, my partner or my loved one or someone's been taken into hospital, gone straight for a chest X-ray, even though like they probably didn't need it. They just need some antibiotics.
Break their leg or something."
Honestly, and then it's just like, oh well, you've tested positive on a PCR test because they're testing them at 40 to 45 cycles. They're then put on a COVID ward. They're offered remdesivir, which we know attacks or creates acute kidney problems and the lung failure, which obviously is signs of COVID, bad COVID. So they end up on a ventilator with midazolam.
When you're on a ventilator, you've done. Basically.
Yeah, you got, what was it, like 80-90%
chance of dying.
Yeah, chance of dying on a ventilator.
Yeah.
And if you want to follow the money, ladies and gents, obviously majority of the ventilators that were provided during the pandemic was by Dyson. They were offered a £350 million contract.
Oh, that's nice for them.
Yeah, and a month before the contract was awarded, Boris Johnson's brother started working for them as an executive.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
So again,
bit of a coincidence.
Follow the money.
Yeah. Did you also know that you can get there's such a thing as ventilator-acquired pneumonia?
Right. Okay.
You can read it in the scientific press. I was doing Google searches about, I'm quite often Googling random stuff, and I didn't realise that the ventilators are contaminated with pneumonia bacteria. So when they put you on a ventilator, you acquire pneumonia. You probably wouldn't have got it.
And this is where this new term COVID pneumonia keeps coming from. Because a few people who reached out said, they told him he's got COVID pneumonia. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not a scientist or anything.
COVID's one thing and pneumonia is a different thing.
One's bacterial, one's viral.
Yeah, just like with the flu, right? You get flu, but usually what happens is the flu virus weakens your immune system and then you die from pneumonia because the pneumonia bacteria takes over and kills. Yeah. It's not the flu that kills, it's the pneumonia.
Yeah, which is what happened to my granddad last year. He was 97. It was really good innings. It was pneumonia that kind of like got the better, which it does for so many.
It does.
A large percentage of people that age.
Yeah. My friend's brother passed away from pneumonia at 40-something years old.
Wow. Bless him.
Yeah.
Well, Jo, thank you very much for coming on the show today. And I hope you've enjoyed this experience at the Age of Rob Show HQ. First person to do so. Your trophy will be in the post. Guys and girls, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please make sure you give us a subscribe if you haven't done so already. Please share with as many people as possible. We're going into potentially some dark times, ladies and gents. especially as we go into winter. So it's really important that we get these messages out to as many people as possible, to help as many people as possible. Remember, this isn't a game of I told you so. This is a game of we need to help as many people as possible, as quickly as possible. Okay, and that's the aim of the show. On that note, as the show has grown quite significantly and the demand's growing quite significantly, I'm having to bring in resources from external places. And to that end, if you have got a spare couple of quid or whatever and you'd like to donate to the work that our show is doing, then please do so. The link is in the show notes. It will be very, very much appreciated as we move forward and we try to reach as many people as possible. Your support, as always, ladies and gents, will be forever remembered. If you want to get in touch over the next few weeks, please do so via my website. I'm literally about to launch a large open forum on there, which is going to have pages and pages full of FAQs to do with the whole situation we find ourselves in, whether that be legal, whether that be medical, any kind of scientific papers. It's also given me the opportunity for doctors and nurses in the group that I'm very much a big part of to be able to upload proper, informed content for you to digest in articles from them, and also a place for anybody that's got any questions that they should be able to get them answered as well. So it's going to be pretty much a central hub that anybody can get information for if they come stuck. So if your boss starts, saying you've got to wear a mask at work, if they're pushing, obviously, jabs on you, you can find all the legal templates, all this kind of stuff. It's all going to be centralised in this forum, which will be launching this week on my website, mrajroberts.com. Thanks again for tuning in, guys. And as I mentioned before, please give the show a share. If you can help one person, we're doing our job, right? All right. So for me and Joe, enjoy the rest of your evening, and I'll see you next time on the AJ Roberts Show.